Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It is time. Did you just laugh at me?
No?
I thought you laughed at me.
No, that would be fair.
All right. Well, it's time. Now I'm laughing. The October Q&A. This is my best intro ever, and we're definitely going to stick with it because it's smooth. Yep.
No issues with this one.
No issues. Love it. Just like everything else this month. So Q&A part 1. We asked you guys a bunch of questions on the YouTube community tab. You guys gave us a lot of questions. So lots of great looking questions to go over this month. So that's exciting. So without me butchering this any further, we're going to get into them. Before we do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new 12th gen CPU contact frame by DeBauer. It's well known that the integrated loading mechanism, or ILM, of the LJ1700 sockets bends 12th gen CPUs, leading to an uneven contact surface that reduces cooling performance. Solving this issue, the contact frame replaces the ILM, allowing for a much more even contact with the CPU's IHS and the base of your cooler, which in turn reduces operating temperatures. Installation's quick and easy, and thanks to the use of anodized aluminium, the contact frame is non-conductive. And then, for those of you who wish to further maximize contact, Thermal Grizzly now offers an optional lapping tool, so for more information, please check the link in the video description. Alright Tim, I'm trying to find an RTX 4090 MSRP, but they're all out of stock and only available at terrible prices on eBay and Amazon. Should I be worried, or is it just a matter of time until 4090s will be available everywhere? So we talked about this, saying that we expected for at least 2 weeks you won't be able to buy one. And we're at the 2 week point probably by the time this video goes out.
Yeah, I think when I did my latest GPU pricing update video, I said sort of around that 2 to 4 weeks, sort of a standard amount of time. And if a product is really in demand, then it could be like 2 months. But you know, somewhere in there is where you would expect cards to be available. So yeah, we're like, what, 2 weeks beyond launch?
Pretty well 2 weeks, which was the absolute minimum. Like they were going to be out of stock for at least 2 weeks.
Yeah, and you know, what we've heard from people in the industry is that I think the 4090 is sold a bit better than expected, especially considering there was a lot of supply of the GPU, much more than previous launches. And in a lot of nations, it has sold out. So
here it hasn't.
I think the pricing here is very bad,
which
for
is
the 4090.
Definitely a contributing factor.
But you know, in a lot of European nations and obviously the US as well, it is sold out. But I think we will be seeing not as much supply coming in sort of the restocks. It sounds like a lot of the supply was allocated to the initial launch of the GPU, but there will be resupplies. It's not like the card is just that's it, we put it out. You know, you're going to have to wait months. It seems like there may be a bit of a focus on the 4080 16 gigabyte card, to where more of the supply is going to be coming because that product is launching very shortly. So it seems like there's potentially going to be another maybe stockpiling for launch situation going on there. It's hard to get a read on that, but I think within a couple of months, certainly, you know, if you're looking into December, January of next year, it should be possible to buy a 4090 without having to deal with scalpers and eBay pricing and stuff. Certainly the supply is sounding pretty good. You know, I think so there's been some opportunist scalpers this generation sort of hedging their bets on, you know, we have to suck up the supply so that we can sort of control that a bit. But yeah, I don't think that's going to be too effective. So I'd just wait it out. I think you're going to be able to find one soon. Yeah,
definitely.
Do you guys also see the divide between content creators who generally seem more interested in peak performance and a large section of average users who are more interested in performance/power usage? Over the past several months, I've heard many content creators state that nobody cares about efficiency. They're probably unaware that electricity prices have gone up by 4 times in some places. So yeah, I think we've said on the channel a few times that efficiency is probably one of the lower priorities, especially for gamers. But
what I feel like whatever you say on this, it's somewhat taken out of context. And I think one way to think about this is when I review a $200 GPU versus another $200 GPU, I have a different set of requirements there. I'm heavily focused on value and what you get for that $200. And then when you've got $1,000+ GPUs, value is less of a priority. I often comment that in terms of value, they're dumb, but it's outright performance and VRAM buffers and feature sets become, you know, king. It's all about that sort of stuff. So bit of nuance there in how you go about it. And I think power, for me at least, is one of those things. And it even goes beyond that. So at the stupid high end, I think power is a less of a concern. Having said that, though, if you've got two flagship Halo type products and one uses significantly less power than the other, but they're similar or they've got various overlapping cons and pros, then I will emphasize power usage more because there's a knock-on effect with thermals and stuff like that, which is probably more important to a lot of high-end gamers. So, a lot of people have accused us of focusing on power 1 minute and then not the next minute to favor a certain brand or a favorite company, which certainly isn't the case. It just depends on what the situation is there. So is one brand much better on power, but then is that offset by the fact that the brand that uses more power has better features? So again, it's just listing cons and pros and things to consider when making the purchase.
Yeah, I think that's why it's come up a bit more with this 13th gen versus Ryzen 7000 battle, where in a lot of aspects, they are very similar. You're looking at new platform, the performance is very similar. They've used DDR5 memory as an option, etc. And then one platform uses significantly more power, which just becomes more of a consideration. Whereas often with GPUs, there's many other things to talk about, and it kind of pushes power efficiency lower and lower in the importance level. Like with the 4090, it uses a lot of power, and that's a consideration, but also it's very fast. It has great features. It runs ray tracing really well. NVIDIA's feature set's really good. So all of those things tend to get weighted above power efficiency.
It's a disadvantage, but it's offset by
I think it's pretty rare that you see two products where the things that people care about more, and I still think people do genuinely care about performance, value, and features more than they care about efficiency. But it's pretty rare that all those things are equal and then power efficiency starts to become a concern.
I mean, you could watch one of our reviews and hear us talk more about power and then less than another, but there's a reason for that. And it's not because we're trying to favor a brand. It's just because we feel like it's, as Tim said, a more important feature because the other features are more evenly matched. But anyway, I don't think there's too much of a divide between... There's obviously always going to be content creators who are more focused on overclocking, tuning and stuff like that. And I think we are more geared towards the typical user because that's just how the channel's been from day one. It's kind of the goal of the channel. I'll often poll things with you guys on the community tab, see what you think. And sometimes we have to find a happy medium, when a lot of people start asking for like 4K CPU benchmarks, which, look, that's something we'll do in scaling, content, featured content, stuff like that, but not so much day one reviews. But we did include 1440p because I think that was the most requested. But yeah, we try to make it useful as well as somewhat scientific without going just synthetic scientific, which is probably less useful for consumers. But anyway, probably leave that one, move on.
Are there any plans to do some B650 board roundups? Has B650 brought the Zen 4 value a bit more appealing to buyers?
Do you want me to start with that one, Tim?
Go.
Well,
start.
I think it's I think a bit more is probably the word to use. It's made it a bit more appealing.
a tiny bit.
A tiny bit more.
Tiny little bit.
Pricing's not good there at all really for a B series board. So what I can answer is yes, we will be doing B650 VRM thermal testing board roundups, looking at features and that sort of stuff, starting soonish. So I've got probably a dozen boards already, so I've got a lot of testing to do. We'll get into that, provide you guys with all that information. I'll be starting with the cheapest 2 to 3 boards from each brand to look at those bit cheaper options and see if that makes sense. But yeah, a lot of the sort of the mid-range boards, last time I checked, they were like $220, $230.
Yep.
And it's like, well, that's not that much cheaper than sort of X670 entry level. So yeah. But anyway, there's a lot to discover and look at there. I will be doing it. Hopefully, as I start to do it, pricing will improve so we can recommend these boards a bit more.
Yeah, they need to be like $100 cheaper, which sounds pretty brutal when you've got a lot of boards that are like $200 to $250, when really the entry position, like the cheapest board, should be around $100, and reasonable ones, $130,
I think the cheapest boards at $170 though are considerably better than the $100 boards. Like,
sure,
I
but it's not
don't. I haven't.
making the point of entry particularly good.
Well, generally at $100, especially initially, you get like no VRM heat sinks or really crap
yeah,
quality.
sure.
Whereas we're seeing quite high quality. Well, I believe we are. I haven't delved into it too much yet, but it looks like the $170 boards probably should be more around the 120, 130 mark, which
Yeah.
isn't that much difference to what you're saying, but
It's still a big price drop.
yes.
I think previously you have been able to get very decent quality boards below $150. Whereas with this generation, it's like maybe
I think
$200.
Yeah, I think though at present, like B550, B660, the decent quality boards are in that $150 range. They're not as cheap as they were. So I think
So you're saying pricing has gone up?
pricing's definitely gone up. Yeah, you don't get really good quality boards. At least last time I looked for $100 for any of the platforms.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, something to explore, something to look into, and yeah, I think we both agree though that pricing there does need to improve.
Yeah.
I would say by about $50.
Well, you can just look
the
at
entry.
what, like an entry-level Z790 board is a very similar price to entry-level B series boards for AMD. So something needs to give there, I think.
Yeah.
All right, this question is a bit of a hot topic at the moment.
Pun intended.
A few perspectives. What do you guys think about the NVIDIA power connector and its problems? So I think this has been brought up because recently there's been some Reddit threads about people's power connectors on their RTX 4090s melting.
Limited reports so far.
So they're using the new 12-pin power connector, whatever it's called, the HPWR or something. We'll put up the correct name there. But yeah, there's been a few reports of that connector melting. So you've got one. You've got at least the adapter between.
This is the 4/8 pin, and so this has the official PCI Express 5.0 power connector here with the 4 cents pins and all that, little NVIDIA logo on it. And so you can see how mine naturally goes there. So anyway, I'll explain first what we think we know. So it's to do with how these are bent when connected to your graphics card, because that sort of leverages the pins to reducing the contact patch it has with the actual pins that it inserts into. So my understanding is the optimal configuration is basically that.
Yeah.
Or having the bend back here like that. So you want the cables going into the pins as straight as possible, so they're not pulling on the pins and sort of levering them off.
This wire is directly connected to the pin as opposed to the plastic outer housing.
Yep.
So the outer housing is almost like a separate entity to the pins.
It keeps them somewhat in control, but not.
You bend the wire and the pin does move a little bit, which is again where those contact issues come from.
So basically, they're saying that which no one's going to achieve, is that sort of optimal for a 90-degree bend, and not sort of what most people would do is like something like that.
Yeah, so you bend it from where you can bend it from.
Yeah, which is most people will tuck them up under the card like that.
Yep.
So I'd say that's I don't know how well you guys can see this, but I can possibly add some B-roll, but don't hold me to that. And then they're saying the worst configurations are having them pull like that to the sides. Any sort of way like that is the worst. The worst configuration, because for the leading edge, the pins furthest away from the cable, they're the ones that are under the most pressure and unaligned the most. And then I don't know to what percentage you'd be reducing the contact patch there, but enough to start heating things up and creating arcing and stuff that eventually sets this on fire. So that's the problem as we understand it at this point in time.
I think it's important at this point to state that
that's what I was about to say.
This issue is a separate issue to the
connectors
supposedly failing after 30 connects or disconnects on this unit.
Yep.
So the failures that we've seen reported so far have been from either a single connection or very limited connection. So people setting up their graphics card for the first time.
So it's to do with the connection quality.
Bending it. The 30 insertions and whatever, we talked about this in a previous Q&A video, that was misreported and was incorrect. This connector is not going to fail after 30 connections.
It's rated the same as these.
Rated the same as those. The issue appears to be a different issue, which maybe has been a bit conflated with the connector's fragile or fail after 30 connections issue. But this is a separate issue. And the issue is you connect it once, you bend the cables or do something to reduce the contacts inside, and that starts melting the cables.
Guys like BuildZoid have put forth some really good commentary on this, pointing out stuff like, so this connector here is rated for 600 watts. These much larger connectors are rated for 150 watts. So basically these have a far higher safety margin. You're never going to burn one of these up at 150. Basically, you could just about have them just teetering in and almost deliberately arcing them, and you'll struggle to burn them up. Whereas this is very much on the edge of its rating, and smaller pins, less of them. So there's being a lot more is being asked of this than of these four. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So which is potentially the problem. Having said all of that, while we agree with BuildZoid that this is a interesting, well, I don't think he used quite interesting as the word, but this is possibly a suboptimal solution to replacing these four. We don't know for sure if there is a problem with this. We don't know to what degree the problem is. This could very much be a POS cap situation all over again, where, I mean, it's probably less of that because that turned out to be completely unrelated to capacitors entirely and was a driver issue that was causing the GPU frequency to fluctuate much more rapidly than it should, which caused games to crash. This is clearly a connector problem. What we don't know is how widespread it is. We don't know how prevalent it is. We don't know if the connectors that have burnt up were defective. We don't know exactly how they were installed and what the user had done there. There's a lot of unknowns, and it's not as widespread, I think, as how many reports have there been online now of burnt up connectors?
Like
3, maybe?
A few.
I actually don't know. I don't know. There's a few, but there's not hundreds. Like
No. We're not talking double digits, I don't think.
No. There's certainly less than 10, at least based on the information I've seen online. And, well, yeah, basically we don't know how likely you are to have a problem with this, whether it's just been, as I said, a couple of defective connectors, or if, it's only early days as well. So we're going to see in 6 months, we're going to see many more instances of these things burning up. I guess that's what we'll have to wait and see. So far, I've been running 3 4090s almost around the clock, one in my streaming PC and then 2 in test systems. The test system one, I've actually put some photos on Twitter. It's just a complete mess. There's cables bent in every single direction because I just plug it in, connect them all up and get testing. I don't care to do proper cable management for test systems. One of them is the correct native cable that goes from an ATX 3.0 power supply, and that thing just reaches, so I've bent the crap out of that to loop it on. Tim just saw that before. He's like, I don't think this is right. And that hasn't had a problem. And the one in my streaming PC, which uses one of these, again, it's connected to the graphics card like that. They go down and across sideways, which is apparently one of the worst ways you can do it. And I've gamed for many, many, many hours and no problems yet. So I guess...
Yeah, I think with all these early things, it's like when we start to see like 1 or 2 issues, there tends to be a bit of a panic where people are like, oh no, I'm going to buy 4090, I'm going to bend the cables, I'm going to burn my house down. Which we don't
know
have
if that's true or not.
information at this point. And maybe when this video gets released in a few days, maybe there's been some updates on this situation compared to when we filmed this, because it is kind of a breaking news story at the moment. But I think it's important not to like panic too much about buying 4090 and the potential of burning your house down. Certainly take a bit more care with installing your cable with these particular GPUs and try not to do the bending behavior that could cause issues. But, when we've got all those people who are having issues, the handful, versus a lot of people who are clearly using 4090s without their cables melting, there's still a very good chance that you're going to not run into issues with the particular connector, especially because, we'll get some more reports over a couple of more weeks of usage, I'm sure. But so far, I don't think any reviewers saw their cables burn up or anything during the review process. No. But you know what I'm saying, right? Like
we're certainly not saying it's a non-issue, but we're also not saying it's a massive problem either. We're just saying
there's just not enough information.
We need more information. And it's kind of funny because the RTX 2080 Ti, there was possibly some early memory issues or something. Remember, we got the Space Invaders.
Yeah.
And, everyone jumped, well, not everyone, but a lot of people jumped the gun saying, oh, the 2080 Ti silicon's defective and, there's going to be all these problems ongoing. And it turns out maybe it was a bad batch of memory. And that seemed to just self-correct.
Yeah, weren't people like trying to figure out whether they had Samsung or Micron memory
Yeah,
back then? They were like,
yeah.
"Oh, I want the good one and not the bad one." And
Well, I think it probably was memory related. But either way, it wasn't a defective GPU. And
No.
before long, that all went away. And I've still got my original 2080 Ti and no dramas, but I did have one that died. So, yeah, but basically there was that. Then we got the 3080, which had the POS cap drama, which turned out to be just a driver bug that was solved quite swiftly, and there was no performance loss there. And now we've got this, which certainly does seem like, at least for the ones that are burning up, is a serious issue. We just don't know how widespread this serious issue is. And as Tim said, we'll hopefully over the coming weeks get more information. And before long, we'll know just how serious and how much of a concern it is. But for now, I don't think we have too much more to say. We've sort of explained what the problem is at this point in time as it's understood. And
I mean, personally, I think the connector, they probably could have just continued to use the existing PCIe 8-pin connectors. There was really not too much that was wrong with those connectors apart from being big. And apparently PCB space is now suddenly an issue for connectors. I'm not sure whether that's a valid concern or not. I think those connectors were fine. But also the new connector has gone through, it's not like they've just made up this connector and are like, oh, now just use it. This is something that has been supposedly tested by many different organizations.
Well, they did burn up at least one in the validation, but that was apparently like it was cable tied to a 90-degree angle or something. And
usually those testing bodies will provide reports to...
so it was quite a severe use
NVIDIA,
case.
I think Intel was involved with making the power connect, obviously the PCIe group, all those... it's gone through many different people looking at this issue.
Yep.
So certainly if there was a widespread problem with the connector, there's a lot of people involved with that have made some pretty poor decisions. And, I'm sure NVIDIA has looked at all the information when deciding to use it for the 4090 and their previous GPUs, considering a variation of it was used for some Ampere GPUs as well. So there's a lot of people in the chain here. And I'm not saying that means it's going to be a good working connector, but generally speaking, when things go through that many processes, you'd be hoping that any issues like this are very much edge cases, as opposed to you plug it in and it just burns up straight away.
Yep.
So we'll have to see how that happens. I'm sure NVIDIA will be treating the customers where this has happened to pretty well. I believe they've already got in touch with some of the people that are affected. So let's hope it's not a widespread issue. With DLSS developing even more over the last couple of years, ignoring frame generation in DLSS 3, how does the picture quality compare with running 4K DLSS quality versus 4K native? Like, if frames were good enough either way if capped by a monitor, which makes more sense to run? Sometimes I swear DLSS quality looks better, but I'm curious if it's something you all have tested or would you be interested in diving into? Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think over time, as we've been covering more and more of these technologies, looking at FSR, looking at XeSS, we've gotten more examples of DLSS in games and looking in depth at it. And even, I think last year when I covered the DLSS sub-revision, like 2.3 or whatever it was at the time, they've certainly been improving it a lot. And a lot of the issues that were there with like just the straight 2.0 version, like ghosting and blur and motion and stuff, they've solved with things like adjustable sliders for sharpness. Ghosting has been minimized in a lot of cases with the revisions and things like that. And in some cases, genuinely DLSS does look better than native. I think today are delivering more on that marketing than when they launched it. Especially at DLSS, I don't know where they said at DLSS 1.0, but that was obviously not true. DLSS 2 is like sometimes, and now I think there's more game examples where I would say that using something like DLSS quality at 4K specifically is worth using over native, or even something like DLAA, which is the run it at native resolution, just anti-alias the image. So yeah, DLSS does continue to improve. I've been pretty impressed with it in a lot of the current games that we've got available, new releases, things like Spider-Man. I think it looks really good. You can adjust that sort of sharpness to your liking. And that sharpness slider works really well for things like 1440p, where DLSS has tended to be a bit too soft at times. I think they've definitely been listening to the feedback of the issues that people are seeing and working on it and improving it. And yeah, there are still games where DLSS doesn't look as good as native, so you do still have to take it on a case-by-case basis. Often games that have really good native TAA, things like that, tend to still be quite good natively. But yeah, I've been pretty impressed. And even looking at things like DLSS 3, while I was a bit more mixed on that, it just sort of reinforces that you look at DLSS as a whole more closely, and you're like, yeah, this technology does continue to improve and still is very impressive. And I think, as we sort of talked about in previous questions, remains a selling point for NVIDIA GPUs. So yeah, you kind of have to give them credit for continuing to improve that after, a few missteps way back in the early days of DLSS 1. It's certainly come a long way since then. Long way.
Yep, seems a long time ago now.
Yeah. So yeah.
Alrighty, when do you think it would be time to call that there is something wrong with ARC availability? So Intel's ARC GPUs and you just Screech GPUs. Well, yeah, you can't buy them, can you?
Yeah, it's odd. I think it's been easier to find them in regions like here in Australia than in some other countries. But it certainly appears like there's not very many that they've made. They have not made many of, especially this A770, A750.
Yep.
Really doesn't look like there's good availability of those cards. And whether or not that's a strategy, I'm not sure. It seems like with this early launch, they're kind of testing the waters as opposed to really trying to get this into the hands of buyers. I think they probably recognize that there are issues with things like drivers and so on that, is going to dampen excitement over people buying them. But yeah, were you expecting more availability? I think it's pretty much it's gone as expected, right?
Well, in all honesty, I didn't know what to expect.
Fair enough.
So I'm not shocked with with how it's played out. But I won't. I don't think I'd claim to say that I sort of knew how this one would go. For me, it was more just sit back and
see what happens.
And yeah, so I'm not shocked by any of it. And yeah, I'm just intrigued. From start to finish, I've been intrigued, and we'll see where this goes. And if they end up making a proper go of it, I don't know, but I don't have too much more to say on it, really.
Yeah, too much. Very, very early adopter feel to this, and you have to sort of wait for their next gen to see whether things improve from here. Regarding reviews, when all three biggies release their offspring at the same time, do you do any coordination with other YouTubers you trust and value opinions of? For instance, making sure something important is covered when you're covering something else that's important, or when you wanted to, test two things at the same time, do you check with others and then do the other thing? I guess, do you contact other reviewers?
Yeah, definitely. For more recent releases, and well, for years now, I talk with Jared from Jared's Tech a lot. Generally, he covers the sort of new CPU and GPU releases, so we share notes, check, averages across multiple benchmarks, power figures, things like that. Was he seeing the 13900K hit 100 degrees straight away and that sort of stuff? And, so there's not something wrong with my cooler or my CPU. So we talked about all that kind of stuff. Touch base with Steve from Gamers Nexus here and there. So yeah, there's definitely other YouTubers out there who we talk to and see what they're finding and what their thoughts are and stuff like that. Quite a few people asked me if Steve from Gamers Nexus and I sort of shared notes on thumbnails and titles for the 13900K reviews, because I think we were two of the more critical YouTubers of the operating temperatures and power consumption. But no, we actually didn't talk about that particular release at all, I don't believe. It was mostly Jared I spoke to on that one. But yeah, I do talk to Steve on other releases. So
yeah. I don't think there's much coordination in terms of like, I'm not going to have time to cover this. Do you want to cover this?
No, there's none of that.
That doesn't happen.
None of that.
Pretty much at all. I think
it's more just, have you tested this and did you see this behavior, or are you having this stability problem, or did you run into this issue and stuff like that. So generally, we get faster feedback from each other than we do going to AMD, Intel, or NVIDIA.
Yeah. So yeah, nice to chat to other YouTubers at times.
Definitely. All right, I'm going to hit pause on part 1. You laughing at me again?
No.
All right. You better not have been. So part 1 is done. There will be a part 2 for sure in the next day or so, depending on how quick our editor is. But yeah, a lot of good questions on this one again, as usual. Had a lot of fun answering them. And that is a wrap for this one. Nothing else to say, Tim?
No, just if you're interested in supporting the channel, we do have Patreon and Floatplane available. So probably would be too late to catch our monthly live stream if you're watching this Q&A episode, but next month there'll be another live stream for you to enjoy. We've got BTS videos. We've got our Discord community, which is a whole lot of fun, especially during these release seasons. It's usually very active, people discussing all the news and stuff, and keep us updated and keeps us in the loop, which is good. So yeah, that's well worth signing up for. And yeah, that's pretty much it, to be honest. We'll be back with part 2 in the coming days, so stay tuned for that one. And yeah,
I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve. See you next time.